Hello everyone and welcome. I would like to introduce you to our new friend. This is the DCS AJS-37, or more commonly known as the Viggen, made by Leatherneck Simulations. The Viggen is a 1970s Swedish Air Force supersonic single-seat attack aircraft. It was designed to be a low-level striker with good acceleration and supersonic performance, along with short takeoff and landing capabilities. Although the Viggen has some multi-role capabilities, its main functionality is to focus on pre-planned targets, with only a single attack on a target area and then egress at high speed. Let us step into my office. As we have learned from Leatherneck's previous work, it is no surprise that the cockpit is a work of art. As you would expect, all the details are there, and as you can see from here, it is all in very much Swedish. Admittedly, this made for some difficult studying as I tried to match the English and Swedish words together and commit as much to memory as possible. But fear not, as Leatherneck do plan on making the English cockpit available to you upon release. The other stunning feature that is immediately noticeable in the pit is the lighting. If you guys remember from Leatherneck's previous work on the MiG-21, we saw great lighting work by these guys. However, in the Viggen, when the lights are on, they feel real. Those lamps give off exactly the kind of light that you would expect from those old types of bulbs that they used back in the day. Not to mention the amazing lighting you get from the radar and the reflecting glow that shines around the pit due to its radioactive green tint. The exterior of the Viggen is fabulous. She is obviously modeled to damn near perfection, and although we could spend some time looking at all of her curvy features like a teenager hitting puberty, I think we can move on to another category that is rather more striking, and that would be her sound. The sound design of the Viggen is absolutely sublime. And I'm not just referring to the deafening roar of the engine, but to all of the other little details that can be heard as you operate this beast. I love the sound of the canopy closing.
Hold on, I want to listen to it again.
It sounds so sad. I absolutely love all of the clicking from the different positions of the throttle. You will have several different clicks to let you know the power setting as you pull out of idle, as well as 3 distinctive clicks you will fall in love with as you get past each afterburner zone. There is, however, one horrifying sound you do not want to hear in this aircraft. That banging sound on the side of your fuselage is a compressor stall. This happens when there is a disruption of airflow into the engine caused by wild movement of the throttle, or more commonly, flight at high angles of attack. The mild side effect of this will just be the banging sound of the compressor stalling. However, a more catastrophic result will end up with an engine flameout of the combustion chambers. And I was very impressed when I compared this to the sound of a compressor stall in an airliner jet. Okay, so how about operating this aircraft? Is it hard? Well, the answer to that is both yes and no. The degree of difficulty lies mainly in learning the functionality of the Viggen, and as you can see here, she is very much all analog. A couple of switches here remind you of the old school typewriters. There are some very advanced functions in the Viggen for its time though, as for example, it was one of the first aircraft to have an aircraft computer implemented. But as with all new technology, it comes with its own limitations and problems, such as navigational drift over time. I believe the biggest issue for most players will be learning the correct procedures you will need to follow in order to get the Viggen to do what you need it to. And unfortunately, it uses this damn data panel, which might as well be in all Swedish, since you will have to rely on having several different charts available to understand what some of the codes mean, or what the display is actually showing you based on the function you have selected. There really isn't a whole lot to memorize, but it sure can get very confusing for the new guys at first. Personally, I made sure to write down a lot of things on my kneeboard and reference it when I'm not 100% sure of something, especially with this damn Swedish data panel. From the A10, we are used to seeing quite a lot of information on the heads-up display. So when you hop into the Viggen and look through the HUD, you may be somewhat disappointed. It looks quite bare, and for the most part, it's quite basic. However, there is more information being displayed than what meets the eye. The HUD heavily relies on showing you things visually based on symbology rather than words or numbers. For example, the HUD will go into a takeoff mode when taking off, letting you know when to rotate, how far to put your nose up for a good climb, and then it will revert back to normal HUD functionality all automatically. That does seem to be a common theme here for the Viggen, as for such an old aircraft, there is a surprising amount of things that happen automatically under the hood. Flying the Viggen is relatively easy. She's incredibly stable even past Mach 1. It also helps that you have an autopilot system that helps you dampen and smooth your controls, called Spock. Without it, you will noticeably fly sloppier, especially on the rollouts, when compared to having Spock help you at the controls. Aside from regular maneuvering, you also get a few new toys to play around with for landing. The first of which is the AFK system, which apparently translates to, and I'm not kidding, the automatic fart control. Essentially, this will help you reduce pilot fatigue by automatically adjusting the throttle based on one of the three conditions when engaged. When the landing gear is up and the AFK lever is on, the AFK system will maintain 550 km per hour. With the landing gear down and the AFK lever on, the system will shoot for a speed that will maintain about an AOA of 12 degrees. The third condition is the same as the second, but with a 15.5 degree AOA when the 15.5 button is pressed. In order for the Viggen to be able to stop as short as possible, a reverse thrust lever is present. When pulled, reverser claps will close the ejector and direct engine exhaust forwards and slightly downwards. The more power you give it, the harder you slow down. Before you get any fancy ideas, no, you cannot use this while in the middle of flight for some super duper evasive maneuver.
I'm gonna hit the brakes, he'll fly right by. You're gonna do what?
Pulling the lever in flight will prime the reverse thrust to engage as soon as the main and nose wheel is pressed down. And I gotta say, it is a lot of fun to land this thing. So, landing this thing is a ton of fun, but there is one thing you should be aware of for takeoffs. Make sure to put a curvature on your rudder because there is no way that I know of that disables a nose wheel steering, and she can be a handful when you get halfway down a runway.
I only wanted a small adjustment.
Let's talk about the PS-37 radar for a bit. Leatherneck did something quite revolutionary in DCS, as for the first time we finally get a ground radar. Although this radar is capable of doing some basic air-to-air, mainly for ranging purposes, you will spend most of your time using it to find targets on the ground instead. It uses three modes: A0, which is radar off, A1, which turns the radar on in wide search mode, and A2, which will use narrow search mode. For those of you who have a Thrustmaster Warthog HOTAS, you can map this function to your boat switch, as you can see here. Leatherneck have made it so that the center position of the boat switch will cycle to the A1 mode. The image you will see is mostly unfiltered and rather noisy. The primary use of this radar is to find ships at sea. They have made it so that the radar will display the ships clearer if you point your radar abeam to the ships. rather than approaching the ships from their front or rear, which will show you a smaller picture with fewer radar returns. In order to spot ground vehicles, you will need to be within 30 kilometers of the targets, and you're further out and the target size is just too small for the radar to show. Once spotted, you can mark that position in the same way that you would set a sensor point of interest in the A10, and depending on what weapon you have selected, you can now use that position to deploy your weapons. Additionally, the radar is used for navigation, with it showing you the next waypoint's location, as well as landing procedures in low visibility. On top of that, it has a terrain avoidance mode, where it will show you the terrain ahead, allowing you to navigate around obstacles. Do not confuse this with the TFR of an F-16. The Viggen merely shows you pretty pictures. It is all up to you to make sense of it and manually steer the aircraft around said obstacles. You can additionally use the radar to manually set navigational fixes in order to fix any nav drift that may have occurred during flight. In order to do this, you will need to map the trigger to the T1 and TV buttons. It is worthy to note that the radar does not lock onto things, as it instead identifies the position of terrain features and potential targets. The Viggen possesses roughly 10 available weapons, and we don't have time to look at all of them right now, but I will give you a look at the main weapons that I find to be the most fun. If you have a particular area you want to obliterate, you have a few choices at your disposal. One such choice would be the Arak M70B rockets. You can mount 4 rocket pods with 6 rockets in each pod for a total of a lot of rockets. The destruction comes from it firing in a single salvo that empties all the tubes in 0.6 of a second. They come in high explosive or armor-piercing forms. However, be aware that this does require the knowledge of what the target position QFE is, as you can see the calculations for aiming these rockets is wholly dependent on that information. This seems to be the case for a majority of these weapons. Now, if you want to do the same exact thing from more of a standoff range, then I have great news for you. The BK-90 cluster munition dispenser is an absolute blast. Literally, a blast. I'm not kidding. Your frames will drop.
3, 2, 1, say cheese!
Oh, the frames!
This is nothing like the CBU-97s though. They come in a form of a glider that spits out the cluster of munitions over the target once you set their position through the use of the radar. This allows you to fire the gliders about 10 kilometers away from the AO, and you don't even need to be facing the target directly, as they will guide themselves onto the targets. Please do take note that as of this recording, the effectiveness of these munitions is at the mercy of the standard DCS damage model. Leatherneck are looking into trying to make it more effective, but this is an ED level issue that is mostly outside of Leatherneck's hands. Next up, we have a weird weapon called the RB05 Missile. This is a radio-controlled missile that can be shot at pretty much anything your heart desires. When launched, you have absolutely full control of the missile with a separate controller that you steer it by visually inspecting the flight path of the missile, as it has a large flare on its ass to help you spot it all the way to its destination. This missile can be a little finicky at first, but with some practice you'll be able to hit targets no problem at standoff range. Now remember when I said that you can use this against anything? I meant anything. Yep, the missile is fitted with a proximity fuse in order for it to work in air-to-air mode.
Shack's cool.
Not exactly the most feasible thing to do, but certainly a great amount of fun. But I believe a more practical weapon for standoff range would be the RB75, which is essentially the AGM-65A Maverick. We are all quite familiar with that weapon, as it works pretty much similarly to the A10 version, so we're not really gonna take a look at it. Next up, we have Le Crème of the crop weapon for the Viggen, as it thrives in its environment with anti-ship missiles. You have 2 flavors to choose from, the RB04E or the newer version, the RB15F. The 15 will yield a longer range for more sophisticated targeting than the 04, but it does require more work and planning to get it to work properly. The 04s though still do a fairly decent job, so I can recommend either one for anti-shipping purposes. As far as guns go, the Viggen does not have an internal gun. If you want guns, you are going to need to bring them along in the form of the ACAN gun pods. Each pod carries 150 rounds with the casing staying in the pod. The gun pod is to be mainly used for air-to-ground, but it obviously has air-to-air capabilities. If you are looking for a dogfight, it will be a lot smarter to use some air-to-air weapons. Thankfully, the Viggen can be fitted with 4 rear-aspect RB24J heat seekers or 2 of the all-aspect RB74 heat seekers. Their range is piss poor and gets spooked rather easily by countermeasures, so be mindful of that when going up against your prey. Speaking of which, how well does she dogfight? Well, in my limited testing, I can say that with no external weapons, the Viggen will make an excellent instant turn rate up to around 180 degrees. However, past that first 180, you really need to start easing up on the controls as the compressor stalls will start to limit your actions. So if you manage to get a drop on a guy, you certainly can turn in very quickly to put your nose on him. However, in a drawn-out fight against an agile fighter, you are pretty much doomed to fail. You only have the advantage in the first few seconds of the fight, and after that, it's just a constant struggle for air to avoid seizing the engine. It's hard to summarize my feelings about the Viggen. We all look forward to aircraft that can dominate the battlefield in DCS. A ton of people will worry about how effective the planes they are considering to buy will be in the multiplayer arena. I have since stopped worrying about those little details. The simple reason being is that we have seen players take even the most disadvantageous birds to the air in DCS world and still kick ass. Players will go to great lengths to get kills and show off their skill in an older gen aircraft against the mighty Sukhois and Eagles. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the Viggen will not be a slouch. It has a definite role to fulfill in DCS, even if its main highlight will be the anti-shipping job. Up to this point, the only player-controlled planes capable of coming close to that job were the Frogfoots. So I think that the Viggen is a new challenge to the players who are constantly seeking the next new thrill. With a bunch of new toys to play around with and a beautiful ground radar that laid the groundwork for future modules that will use a similar technique, Leatherneck has permanently embedded itself as a competent and trustworthy company. But I guess you guys already knew that if you bought the MiG-21, right? As always, great job, Leatherneck. Already can't wait for your next project.